Hi folks, I've recently had a question of whether I would field any of the models I've spoken about, and the answer to that is yes. So today's video will be just that. So when heading to a game, make sure all the models are packed securely and with enough space to ensure they don't break. So I'd like to start by saying that this game was never actually completed because we ran out of time, but it does give you a fair idea of how some of the Order faction units stand up against the Chaos Army. After winning priority, my opponent chose his Wrath of Khorne Bloodthirster as his general, with a Lord of Blood Hunt command ability, which is explained here. This allowed all of his units to run except for the cannon, and seeing as everything was too far away for the shooting phase, it was then my turn to move my models. So after moving, this is what the board looked like, with the enemy general looming over my tiny soldiers, with blood warriors swarming in from my right and bloodletters coming at me from the left. As you can see from the layout of the board here, my units are up against larger units of 20 bloodletters, 10 blood warriors, as well as everything else. So I could feel my mind racing ahead, but I had to stop myself until the shooting phase had passed. My opponent chooses to aim his cannon at my Reavers and successfully lands a hit, killing one of my riders in his steed instantly. He then proceeds to use the general's blood flail, but fails to wound anyone with it. After running out of moves for the shooting phase, my opponent rolls to charge the looming Bloodthirster, but his dice let him down severely, giving me a chance to come up with a plan. He ends his turn and I roll for Battle Shock, passing with flying colours as my Reavers have quite high bravery. So at this point, after pronouncing my Lord Celestant on Dracoth and our general, I use his command ability to give all Stormcast troops within 24 inches Battle Shock immunity, ensuring no one runs away later on. I then move on to the hero phase and cast the sister's signature spell Shield of Thorns upon my Griffin, making sure that he's safe, but unfortunately my Lord Relictor was too far out to use any of his prayers. So as you've probably noticed, two lots of my units are shooting units, and I decided to bring them along as they help to cause as much damage as possible in any given turn, especially when up against a Bloodthirster. So I started off with my Reavers with 2 attacks each, plus 1 each for being more than 3 inches away. This is part of the Swift Rollers ability that they have. I aimed those strong wooden bows at the warriors, but my dice let me down and they only caused 1 wound. I forgot to use the other ability throughout the game, so I didn't inch forward, but stayed put at a safe distance. Sadly, my sisters were too far away to be able to aim at the enemy troops, so I tried to coax a good amount of the Dracoth Storm Breath, but failed, causing 0 damage. So I swiftly began my charge phase. I decided to split into 3 main units, with the more formidable swarming around the enemy general. I was not willing to let him live longer than necessary. I used my Griffin, now called a High Warden, to attack the opposing general first. He causes 3 wounds in total with his blade and lance, but the enemy is able to avoid any further damage from the sharp beak. Alas, the claws come scratching from the side, causing 4 more wounds. This enrages him enough to attack my knight Azeros, landing some hits and causing D3 wounds. Luckily, they only came to 2, leaving my knight alive to seek revenge. I then used the unit of liberators that are surrounding the general, and managed to cause 2 more damage, slowly chipping away at his health. At this point, I should probably add as well that the liberators have an ability called Lalo the Tyrants, which is just explained here. And my opponent gets lucky with his next turn, using his Bloodletters to attack my heavily armed Retributors. The desert heat must have got to them though, as they suffered 5 mortal wounds, killing one of the unit and injuring another through the decapitating blow ability. They then suffered 2 additional wounds that I could not prevent, causing the loss of another Retributor. Now that the Bloodthirster can no longer attack, I take this opportunity to use my Dracoth to attack Valkyria. I use a Tempestor's Hammer ability to gain 3 extra attacks, but lose 1 from her Demon Shield ability. This still gives me 5 attacks in total, causing 3 unsaved damage. My Dracoth's claws and fangs have no effect as she swiftly dodges any attempts. Infuriated, she retaliates with her spear Slopnir and manages to inflict 4 wounds at the Dracoth. Azeros then decides to add more effort into killing the Bloodthirster, causing an additional 2 wounds, but he still hangs on to life, annoyingly. The Karanak also decides to aim an attack at my Dracoth, who is already licking his wounds at this point, and manages to get another wound in with his claws, before his maws are swiped away without further harm. My Sunstruck Retributors decide to retaliate against the Bloodletters, causing some deaths with their Blast to Ashes ability, plus another 2 wounds atop the 4 mortal wounds. My opponent passes his Battle Shock phase without a hitch. The first turn is now over, and as it stands, no major unit has died yet. Both sides stand strong and determined to win. I win priority for the next turn, and I wisely choose to go first. I wasn't taking any risks, and I had a plan. I used my General's Command ability as before, and still in the hero phase, I opened the Celestial Beacon held aloft by Knight Azeros. Now this is deadly to Chaos troops, causing D6 damage to any enemy unit within 2 inches of a location I choose. Can you see where I'm going there with this? I prayed for a high number and I wasn't disappointed. I pick a point just behind the Bloodthirster and I roll, praying for a 3+. I get a 5. Goodbye Bloodthirster. I roll again for Valkyria and pray for a 2 or more. I get a 4. Goodbye Valkyria. I now roll for Karanak, not being as lucky and only causing 1 damage, bringing his wound count down to 4. Now the board looks a bit more like this, with 2 major opposing units vanquished, but still with a formidable force at hand. I urge my Sisters of Thorn to summon an arcane bolt at the Blood Warriors but fail, so I turned to my Lord Relictor and decided to pray for a healing storm, able to heal 3 wounds upon my Dracoth. I moved closer on the board to my enemy, hoping to still keep them all separated from each other, and set myself up for the shooting again. Again my Reavers use their Swift Volleys ability at the Blood Warriors, causing 2 wounds, and 2 more wounds are inflicted by the Sisters soon after. The Dracoth is too traumatised to even give me a puff of smoke, so my Storm Breath fails again. I charge the majority of my units, but I keep my Sisters at a distance for backup, and 1 unit of Liberators. However, the Lord Relictor fails to roll a decent distance, so I'm unable to get close with him. I decide that this might not be too bad, as they will be at full health if needed later on. The Celestin on Dracoth is getting a bit annoyed at this stage, at his mount's inability to perform, and lashes out at Karanak, causing 2 damage with the Tempestor's Hammer, but the Dracoth fails to land any blows with his claws and fangs. Now my opponent starts getting clever, and decides to split his Blood Warriors, with 4 attacking my Reavers, killing another 2, and the other 5 aiming at the High Warden, managing to inflict its first 3 wounds. Azeros has flown over to the Blood Secretor and lands a blow, and again the enemy decides to split, with 8 Bloodletters ripping into the Retributors, inflicting 4 mortal wounds and leaving only the Prime alive. The other 5 Bloodletters aim their weapons at the unit of Mountain Liberators, who are clearly suffering from the warmth of level ground as they are hit with 2 mortal wounds, as well as another 2, leaving the unit count at 3. The Liberators that had previously surrounded the Bloodthirster are now pushing back the Blood Crushers, causing 3 damage, but they have forgotten about the cannons. These are mounted by 2 Bloodletters, both with Hellblades, who hack at the Liberators from behind, but are easily deflected by the shields, but not before the Gnashing Maw takes advantage of this and causes 1 wound. This triggers the Infernal Machine, putting the ability Grind Their Bones, Seize Their Skulls ability into action. The Griffin goes for the Blood Warriors, killing 2 instantly, but there is no respite as they are able to attack before they are removed, returning 2 wounds and throwing the High Warden off guard. He attacks again with the Starblade, killing another warrior, but again losing another wound in the process. This throws the Griffin into confusion and failing to do anything with his beak and claws. Karanak tries to chew off the legs from beneath the Dracoth, only to be deterred with ease and avoiding their maws with dexterity never before seen in a beast so large. The Illyrian Reavers have another go at the warriors, but only manage to cause 1 damage. and the Blood Secretor tries to do away with the Knight of Zeros, but to no avail as he only wounds by 1 point. The Retributor Prime attempts to salvage back some honour for his lost comrades against the Bloodletters, but fails from his lack of faith in himself, and the Bloodletters on the Crushers are successful in placing a mortal wound upon the Liberators surrounding them, killing one, followed closely by a wounded Liberator who tried to avenge his death before being struck by Juggernaut's brazen hooves. The cannon, now fired up, takes a sneaky shot at Knight of Zeros, killing him instantly. Unfortunately, my remaining Reavers fail Battleshock and flee the battlefield with the heads hanging in shame, as the Blood Warriors do not flee from the shock of loss as well. The Blood Secretor chooses to plant his banner firmly into the bloodied ground, meaning that not only can he not move until the next hero phase, but he chooses to enable the ability Rage of Khorne. This means that enemy units in an 18-inch radius of the Blood Secretor can then add 1 to their attack characteristics on all melee weapons, and they don't have to take Battle Shock, which helps if I kill a bunch of Bloodletters. Now around this point I've run out of photos as it was rushed, so I apologise for that. After the banner is planted, the enemy chooses to run the Herald into the fray, but everything else was left where it was as they were all pretty much engaged in combat. My opponent swiftly goes on to the shooting phase, choosing to aim his skull cannon right at my Dracoth, but unfortunately for him he was out of sight due to the terrain and had to settle for whatever was left of my Retributors. He hits and wounds, but only by 1 point, allowing my Prime to cling on to dear life. My opponent now moves on to charges and managed to get his Herald of Khorne behind the 2 remaining Mountain Liberators on the left. He then continues his move through to combat and sets out with his Blade of Blood at the Liberators, but they are able to defend themselves from these cheap attacks from behind, taking no damage. This enrages the Herald enough to use his Blood Must Flow ability, which affects another Bloodletter unit within 8 inches of his angry self, allowing the larger groups of feral demons to immediately pile in and attack if it's within 3 inches from an enemy and hasn't already used their attack, which of course, being the start of a new phase, was my opponent's much needed luck. So now the Bloodletters now essentially steal their attack early, and again they decide to split into 4, attacking the Liberators, and the rest, as you've guessed, at that poor bastard of a Retributor. 1 mortal wound is immediately aimed at the still remaining Liberators, being crushed in a throng of ugly twisted horns, plus another wound killing off one of the unit. That means 9 Bloodletters are going for the Retributor Prime, who gains a mortal wound but still stands strong with 2 points under his belt. So as it stands, I have 1 Retributor at 2 wounds, and 2 Liberators, 1 full health and 1 with half health, over on the left. My Dracoth at 4 wounds, my Griffin on 4 wounds, 4 Liberators surrounding the Crushers with 1 at half health, and 3 backup units at full health. Now that my opponent has finished trying to kill all the troops on the left side, it falls to me to power on. I decide to send my Lord Celestin on Dracoth after Karanak, killing him with his Tempestos hammer instantly with some overkill, and with the lack of nearby enemies, I have to pass on the beast's attack. It's at this point my opponent realises that his letters had extra attacks from his Secretor that he'd forgotten to add, and he'd berated himself severely, but I wasn't complaining. He swiftly continues to send his cannon into the 4 Liberators by the Crushers, attacking with the 2 Hellblades, killing off the wounded trooper, leaving 3 to fend off the remaining hordes. He proceeds to use the cannon itself, causing no damage with his poor aim. At this point I decide to use the monster model of the High Warden, as he has multiple attacks to try, and clear the remaining Blood Warriors. With the loss of health, this affected certain attributes, so I had to double check the stats. I caused 2 damage with a lance, killing a warrior, who fails to land a hit with his dying retaliation. I continue to the blade and kill another warrior, but the Griffin is tiring at this point and takes a hit from the retaliation, dropping to 3 wounds. Again, his beak doesn't land any hits, and the talons do 0 damage as well. The Crushers now pile in to attack the 3 remaining Liberators, killing 1 poor trooper instantly before their mounts lean over for an attack, but only land 1 damage. My Retributor makes a last stand against a horde of Bloodletters with his 3 attacks as a prime, killing 2 Bloodletters for his fallen comrades. Now the Blood Warriors on the right that are left fight back at the Griffin, getting 1 hit in, leaving that unit at 2 wounds. I swiftly send the 2 Liberators at the Blood Crushers with their Warhammers, getting 1 hit in and killing the runt. So at this point we had to call it a day as public transport was involved, but I think with just this simple game you get a good idea of how things could turn out with a decent dice roll. This was my first time fielding the Retributors and the Reavers, and although the Elven unit didn't disappoint me until a battle shock test, the Retributors with 3 wounds each had no chance, and that might be because I should have probably kept them behind the 2 units of Liberators on the left. You might be wondering why I didn't get my sisters in, and that's because I learnt after my first game that using them, they were better at shooting and being wizards than in close combat where they die easily with just 2 wounds. My Lord Relictor wasn't completely intentional, as I had tried to charge him but failed. However, out of all of them, my Knight of Zeros performed amazingly, just when I needed him to, with the Celestial Beacon, which can only be used once in a game but causes D6 damage to Chaos forces, rather than the normal D3, so I took a gamble there and it paid off.